Welcome back to The Energy Forum, a podcast from the Center for Energy Studies at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. I'm Ken Medlock, Senior Director of the Center for Energy Studies. Saudi Arabia has been undertaking a major effort to diversify its economy. Vision 2030 promised a shift in the economic landscape, highlighted by megaprojects and foreign investment, facilitating a future that sees economic expansion from new sectors. Nearly a decade in, the picture is more complex. Some initiatives are moving ahead, while others are being resized or delayed. Economic reality is a binding constraint, and transitions of any kind are complicated. Moreover, despite international prognostications to the contrary, oil remains the centerpiece of global economic and geopolitical uncertainty. To discuss all of this, we are joined today by Jim Krane, the Tamari Sabbagh Fellow in Middle East Energy Studies, and journalist and author Karen Elliott House, who has covered Saudi Arabia for decades. They examine what's changing inside Saudi Arabia and what it could mean for global energy markets and politics.
All right, well, thanks, Ken, and Karen Elliott House. Welcome to the Baker Institute. It's great having you here.
Thank you.
So wanted to kick off with a little bit of your thinking on the Vision 2030 programs and reforms in Saudi Arabia. You just had a piece in the Wall Street Journal where you said that Mohammed bin Salman was tapping the brakes on some of these projects. Wondering if you could talk about what you meant, what's changed. Is there a more realistic view of the laws of physics, maybe, or what's possible in the kingdom with its construction program?
Yeah, I think from visits in October and January to the kingdom that they are doing more than tapping the brakes. I mean, with some of these projects that they haven't yet had a burial ceremony for, they are in essence dead, like the line. I believe the line will not be resurrected. It was that 105-mile city that they were going to cut to 1.5 miles. I don't think the 1.5 miles will materialize. The Muqab, a lot of other big projects, giga projects as they call them, are not going to be built because they don't make real economic sense. And I think, the Crown Prince initially was trying to show, I'm an innovative thinker. There's been too much, muddle along, go along thinking. I'm going to do something different. And now he has faced economic reality that oil prices are in the $65 range. They are not getting the foreign direct investment they expected. And they have huge debt. So it's time to focus on the realistic things that truly advance the country's effort to revamp its economy.
I mean, do you think there was something, the lack of FDI to me looked like a warning signal that, if foreign investors don't see how they're going to get at least
return.
A medium-term return on this stuff, and they're not coming in. To me, that signals that these might not be the most viable projects.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that should have been seen as a flashing yellow light.
Yeah, good indicator. Also, I was in Dubai when the Dubai crash happened, and I had been, writing about the, their own. Well, they were calling them mega projects back then, so they hadn't been inflated to giga project status yet. But we saw initially some that looked really audacious, but still made financial sense, and did help develop the city. But then, within a few years, they got just out of control, audacious, and we saw what happened, right? There was a financial collapse. Mm-hmm. Did you see anything that gave you pause that that Saudi might face something like, the need for a bailout, for instance, or are the finances in the kingdom more secure in that sense?
I think they're more secure. That they are putting the more than tapping the brakes. They are putting on the brakes for some of the big, really wasteful things. And that, they will be able to continue to borrow money, and they are apparently, I'm told, going to revamp the priorities of the Public Investment Fund to also make those more tied to a real return on investment, not to fantasy projects. So I think they should be able to move on through this period. I mean, they still are having a really hard time getting foreigners to invest. Amazon is agreed to invest $5 billion in an AI project there that would retrain 100,000 Saudis. I've also read 100,000 Saudi women. But, that kind of project is what they're trying to turn Naum, instead of all of these grand ski resorts and yacht resorts, into an AI data area so that they would be on the cutting edge. Again, a grand plan for the whole world. We will be the leader. I think one has to wait and see about that.
Yeah, super interesting stuff. I mean, the rise of Saudi women has been really startling. I mean, one of the key successes of Vision 2030, ahead of schedule, meeting the, 30%?
Yeah, they were supposed to have 30% female labor participation by 2030, up from 22 when they announced that in 2016, and they went over 30%, I think, in 2 years. So they have raised it. But women were the best educated people in the kingdom because they had an opportunity to get an education, and they did, even though they couldn't work really at anything other than being teachers by and large for most of Saudi female time there for 40 years. And when he came along, when the Crown Prince came along and announced all this Vision 2030 opportunity, allowing women to work was like kickstarting the economy, because they had education and pent-up determination to do something. So they, as we would say in Texas, burst out of the chute ready to go.
Yeah, it was like pushing on an open door, as we also sometimes say. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I noticed, was that not only were women, in many cases better prepared, better educated, better English skills, but companies also wanted to diversify. I mean, they had these offices that were 100% or nearly so full of men, and they wanted to bring women. So there was there's a push to hire women, not just because of their skills, but also because of, I guess you could call it DEI, right? Pressures in the kingdom.
I mean, all the business leaders, government offices that I talked to both preferred to hire women. They didn't say because of DEI, but because women were more willing to take training, more willing to come to work at 8 o'clock in the morning and do what's asked, that men, they said, were simply more difficult to manage. Women were educated and eager.
Wow, super interesting. Yeah, big success on that one. One of the other things that I'm interested in chatting with you about is the Public Investment Fund, right? So they are about to announce their next 5-year plan. They seem a bit conflicted. Mohammed bin Salman has been promising lots of inward investment into the United States, as one of his promises he made, on his trip here to visit with President Trump. And then on the other hand, they have increasingly been, the numbers show, they've been pulling their investments out of other countries and increasingly been pressured to invest domestically in the kingdom for some of the remaining Vision 2030 goals that the kingdom still is intent on pursuing. So there seems to be this tension, traditional sovereign wealth fund external investment versus development partner inside the kingdom. Is that something that
what I was told in January, asking about just that was that the kingdom is probably not going to invest $1 trillion in the U.S., but the investment into the U.S. will be in things like AI that they then will take back to the kingdom. So it's not an either or, it's a first and then. So you would invest in some AI project in the U.S. and get that entity to then take part of that investment and know-how into the kingdom.
Interesting. Yes, the AI push has been a big one. I mean, I think they see they've got a lot of vacant land. The state controls it. That vacant land happens to get a lot of solar radiation. They can produce. I mean, they're getting these
cheap energy.
Record tariffs, right? I mean, the lowest one so far is 1.5 U.S. cents per kilowatt hour. There's a developer building a 2 gigawatt solar farm in the kingdom, and it's going to be selling power to the utility for less than 2 cents. I mean, incredibly cheap electricity. So, I mean, other than the cooling load, I'd say Saudi Arabia's got a pretty strong argument for data centers and AI. So,
yeah, they seem to be working on, as the energy minister told me some years ago, we're not an oil producer, we're an energy producer. And, so solar energy, green energy, being the low-cost energy producer. And, of course, their oil, as you know, is the low-cost oil to produce, so that they would then be able to easily provide energy for AI data centers and other things in the kingdom, but they're also talking about exporting energy of various types for green energy for ships. I'm not an expert on green energy, but their whole point is we can produce all kinds of energy more cheaply than most anyone else. We will have more energy to use domestically at a lower price than anyone, and we can also sell energy at a very competitive price.
That seems to be where they're going. I mean, a lot of their economic diversification efforts, are going further downstream and into refining and petrochemicals, plastics, and then manufacturing on the oil side. But then also on solar, on clean energy, various types of clean hydrogen, and then potentially building export cables, undersea, high voltage direct current exports. So they're not just exporting oil and gas and fuels, but also power directly to various countries. I mean, I'm hearing Pakistan, India as potential markets, Cyprus, Greece as potential markets. So who knows?
I mean, energy is clearly, I think, their competitive advantage. The Crown Prince wants to diversify the economy onto other forms of minerals, tourism, but so far it is still kind of an oil, gas, energy derivative economy.
That seems to be where their competitive advantage really lies, and their expertise. Along those lines, their diversification goals and ambitions in Saudi Arabia seem more important than ever now, right? Climate change is here. It's putting pressure on that part of the world. I mean, the warming in the kingdom is palpable. And so it's making their economic diversification more urgent. I think the IMF used to have to pressure them more than they do now. I think that these days the Saudis are they know they need to diversify. Oil market's going to plateau at some point here, but they need more stability. And one of their mantras is de-risking, in various ways, but including, conflict around the region. And there's been a lot of that lately. Is that, can they diversify their economy in a, such an unstable region? Is that making things as tough as Mohammed bin Salman likes to say?
Yeah, I think it's very tough for him personally, that he's had to scale back some of his ambitions, and then to actually diversify the economy is much easier said than done. So developing tourism, it's going along, but it is not yet another real leg for the economy. And trying to do all of that while you have Iran threatening and the U.S. threatening to strike Iran and Israel threatening to take over the West Bank and to disarm Hamas in Gaza. And, so any day you could have huge military messes around you. And Iran is obviously the most high risk. If the U.S. strikes Iran and Iran strikes back at Israel or American military capabilities, for instance, in Saudi Arabia, they would become involved. So, and there's not much you can do about it. I mean, he's doing, I think, the only thing he can plausibly think of to do, saying, I am against this and the U.S. cannot use my airspace to attack Iran or your bases in my kingdom to attack Iran, that there aren't any American interests in Saudi Arabia. There are only Saudi interests in Saudi Arabia. So I would hate to be he.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I learned so much from reading your book. There were so many great anecdotes in there and little nuggets of super interesting detail on, well, first the break-off of diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and then the reestablishment in 2023. So breaking them off, was it late 2015 or early 2016? I think there was an execution. The Saudi, when MBS came in and King Salman came in, there was a big execution. There was a Shia cleric who was executed really quickly. And
the Iranians attacked, as I recall, the Saudi embassy in Iran, and then the Saudis broke diplomatic relations and, were reestablishing them in 2023.
Through intervention from China, which also was pretty interesting.
I think that was more a artifice, if you will. I mean, the discussions weren't, I think the Saudis wanted to give China credit so that China would have a reason to control their ally Iran, that was more the reason for bringing China in than that they needed China to be able to, restore relations with Iran.
You were in Saudi Arabia when that happened. Were you not? Were you surprised?
I was. I mean, I saw the Crown Prince in March of 2023, right before. I think that was announced on March the 5th or 6th or 7th. Something. I saw him a few days before that, and he said, I'm going to, restore relations with Iran. I was shocked. And I said, why in the world would you do that? Because I saw the Saudis and Iranians as not having any of the same interests in the region. And, he basically said the U.S. is not likely to intervene in Iran, so we need to diminish the tension. In other words, we have to look after ourselves, after our interests. And then they announced it and gave credit to the Chinese, but I was surprised.
I mean, his rationale for that, correct me if I'm wrong, but was it based on the Abqaiq attack in 2019, those Iranian missile and drone attacks that took out
the Saudis have had very little faith in America since the Abqaiq attack in 2019, when Donald Trump was president in his first term and, basically did nothing. And the Saudis say they told their friends don't attack Iran, but they were, I think, shocked when the U.S. itself didn't choose to in any way punish Iran for hitting an American partner.
Interesting, too, that was the largest ever oil outage in the history of the oil market. It was almost 6 million barrels a day. I mean, luckily the markets had plenty of supply. Prices were low at the time. It didn't have a big effect. I think it was like a $9 movement of price for about 2 weeks.
And they got it fixed quickly. If it hadn't been repaired quickly, I think it would have, you're the expert, but I think it would have had a bigger and certainly longer price impact.
It would have, for sure. I mean, they had a lot of oil in storage. I mean, they have spare capacity. And I think, Prince Abdulaziz made a key statement that we're going to honor all of our contracts in full, even if we have to buy oil from other suppliers. So just made some very,
the Saudis want to be reliable oil suppliers. I mean, reliability is their middle name where oil is concerned, I think.
That reliability, they've gained the trust, I think, in oil markets. They've been seen, for the most part, as not too political an actor. They've been a fairly trustworthy with bringing spare capacity online when it's needed, when prices, when the market's in distress, for the most part. Do you think they could do something similar in critical minerals? I know they had these ambitions in critical minerals. The geology in Saudi Arabia is still maybe a bit of an open question, whether it's profitable to actually mine there. But, the U.S., Democratic and Republican administrations here want to see an alternate mineral supply chain and some de-risking in that. Rather than building a second supply chain, it occurs to me that Saudi Arabia could provide, some spare capacity in the minerals, maybe if it chose one or two mineral types to process or to stockpile and then maybe price there. Is this something that...
Yeah, I feel like uranium, which is the thing they talk about having 5 or 6% of the world's supply. I don't know if that's true, but that's what they say. I didn't realize that we were, in essence, dependent on Russia for enriched uranium. So it seems to me there is a deal waiting to happen is we enrich uranium, their uranium in their country and buy it from them, or they enrich the uranium and sell it to us. But they're very eager to have their own uranium enrichment. So it seems to me that we certainly can use whatever excess capacity they have. I would far rather depend on Saudi Arabia than Russia myself.
Indeed, yeah. And they want to use some of that fuel domestically for their own, nuclear program.
They want to have nuclear reactors themselves that use uranium, and they want to sell, they say, the enriched uranium, not a bunch of uranium dirt that they dig out. That's hard to market, that they need to enrich uranium to be able to sell it.
In your book, you also talk about, you devote a pretty substantial part of your book to human rights in Saudi Arabia. And you argue that the U.S. gives the Saudis a harder time on human rights than we do other countries, that we give, we're more... we're less worried about what happens inside China, for example, or
Iran.
So why is that?
I think it's because we see Saudi Arabia as something of a partner, and therefore they should have a more enlightened human rights policy. We don't see Iran or China as a partner of ours, so the fact that the Chinese, incarcerate 1 million Uyghurs and, mistreat them in all kinds of ways never really gets any attention in the U.S., and it's also, I think, because with Saudi Arabia, there was 9/11 and the 15 hijackers, and a lot of Americans still feel that the Saudi government had something to do with that. And then more recently, the Khashoggi death. So all of those things leave us more willing to beat up on Saudi Arabia than other people who have far worse human rights records. And that's one of the things, Trump has basically said, I'm here to do deals that win-win deals, and I don't care about such things. So, that obviously for the Saudis makes Trump a man they can do business with.
Yeah, the kingdom also, there's been some massive social changes, huge increase in social freedoms that you talk about in your book. I mean, great example, one after another. But on the political freedoms side, and there never were that many political freedoms, but I think they've shrunk. That the avenues for criticism of the regime are now narrower than they were. Do you think there's a conscious effort to dial one of them, press the lever for social freedoms forward, and dial back on the political freedoms lever? And if so, why?
Well, I think pressing the social lever forward is intended to motivate the young Saudi population. I think it's 63% of Saudis are under 30 years of age. I mean, it's a really, really young society.
And that's his demographic, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah. And those people, are kind of in the Crown Prince's age cohort, and they want to have fun. And he has granted that with rock music and movies and sports events and kind of anything
movies even.
you want to do. Yeah, there used to be no movies. But on political freedom, he cannot afford, he believes, I think, to have everybody second-guessing him. He is, I use the analogy in my book, he is the Pied Piper. He's leading the people, and these young people are following him. And his view is, I don't have time for all of you to question me, for me to explain everything. I once asked him early on, have you thought about President Roosevelt, during the Depression, did fireside chats? And have you thought about explaining all of these things? And he basically said, actions speak louder than words. So if I do something right, people will see it. If I do something wrong, words won't fix it. So I think, that is his view, and he doesn't want people critiquing and criticizing and advising. That he thinks he has ministers to whom he talks. And a lot of young Saudis say, we wish he would do call-ins, let us ask questions. I mean, I think there is a desire to be able to ask more, but I don't see it happening in the near future.
Yeah, it's one of the problems with political repression, traditionally, is when you start repressing speech, then the government, the leadership is less informed about public opinion, and you might wind up there. There could be a opposition swell to something that you're doing that you don't find out about, right? So I think that's important.
My impression is that Saudi Arabia is as effective as China in cameras and, knowing. Surveillance. There, thank you, the word. It's surveilling everything. Now the country is really completely digital. So, if you give money to anybody, it's well known who. So it's I think the surveillance aspect of society gives people like him some confidence that they know what's going on.
So you've met with MBS in the past, and I wonder if you could first talk maybe a little bit about what he's like and what his work ethic is like, and maybe if you've been inside of his office, what that's like, and then how has he evolved? He's been running the show there for a decade now, and he's definitely evolved. I wonder if maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, he is. I think I was surprised the first time I met him in 2016. Then he was deputy crown prince. You walk into his office, he's wearing a long white thobe and had his hair all pulled back tight on the back of his head, but no scarf over his head. Very informal, very unregal. He just sits you down, with a big table loaded with papers in front of you. As I said in the book, the only thing between me and the crown prince was a table full of papers. I mean, he doesn't put on regal airs. He's very, and others I've talked to who have met with him make the same point, so it's not just him trying to affect a non-regal air for somebody like me. And he's very intelligent, and people say, works incredibly hard. He told me that he didn't have a day off between 2009 and 2018.
Wow.
That he was working for his father, and he was working for the then crown prince up till he became crown prince, Mohammed bin Nayef, and that, he worked in essence day and night. Everyone says he's a workaholic and that he exists on very little sleep.
Wow.
He told me that once things calmed down, quote, that since 2018, that he was getting up in the morning and playing 30 minutes worth of video games every morning to relax himself, because he believes video games, quote, stretch the brain. And he then, would eat and work out, and trying to keep himself in good shape. And that, he still seems to work constantly. But the people around him say that he has grown wiser, if you will, that he has a better grasp of reality, what you can achieve and, what you need to achieve, as opposed to the more grandiose visions of what he wanted to achieve.
Is he a policy wonk? Does he get down in the weeds on stuff?
I am told that he does. And if you ask a question, I mean, there's kind of no level, at least I've been able to go to, where he hasn't, where I lose him. That may not be saying much, but, people who do prepare papers for him say that, he asks the question, you then, give him a 200-page report, and that he is still impatient. He won't sit through, a visual presentation of a 200-page report to him and his ministers, that he, comes in with the 200 pages, and he's marked them up, and he says, let's start on page 57, what about, now go to 110, I don't understand this, that doesn't make sense, and that he takes all of this in and, discusses with people. I mean, I think he clearly is a workaholic.
We used to describe him often as impulsive. Has that changed?
Yeah, I used to describe him as impulsive. I think that has changed. I think he's less so. He's less inclined to just believe his instinct. I mean, he told me early on that, he's always been very data-driven, that he looks for information that supports something. But I think some of his early actions were less data-driven maybe than I think they are now. I think he is, he seems to be, I don't see this as a night and day thing, more as a shading, that he was more impulsive and more determined to get action quickly. And now, as I was told when he saw the president of Syria, he told him, don't try to do everything immediately. You can't. It takes time. That when I look at myself early on, I laugh. So that, he seems to realize that he's matured, that he made mistakes. Everybody does. So I think, to acknowledge that you've learned something from 10 years in leadership, the person who wouldn't learn something from 10 years in leadership would be one you wouldn't want in leadership in year 11, I think.
Yeah. There's some things that data's not even going to tell you, about the determination of the Houthis to suffer pain, or, that Yemen war. That didn't, that was one of his early decisions that I would suspect he probably regrets now.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, it didn't work out so well. So, he got out of that war, and more recently, when the UAE tried to supply the Houthis that he's worried about, he bombed their equipment. So
pretty successfully too, right?
Quite
Drove them
successfully,
back.
yeah. So, I would say that he has matured and gotten wiser.
Karen, it's been fantastic having you here. Is there anything you have any anecdotes or anything you'd like to share that I haven't asked you about?
That's one of my questions to people. You can't take that one.
Sorry.
I just think that Saudi Arabia is important, and that Americans don't know nearly enough about it, and energy is one of the main reasons it's important. But he does, as I am fond of saying, he does see himself as an equivalent with Trump or Xi or anybody else. So he intends to be taken seriously in representing his country, and he feels that, yes, he's not a nuclear superpower like Russia, China, and the U.S., but that he has a right to be on the podium with any of those three, and he does it regularly.
And he's not even king yet, right?
Right.
So many of us that watch Saudi Arabia envision seeing him for decades to come. Do you see any hitch in his plans? Anything that could prevent him from becoming king? Or?
As you say, looking at actuarial tables, he should be king for 50 years. That it'll probably happen in the next 6 to 18 months, and then he can last for 50 years. I think, obviously the big challenge for him is personal security.
Karen Elliott House, it's fantastic having you here in the Baker Institute. Your books have decoded that part of the world for us. It's been such a great service that you provide. We really appreciate you coming and spending time with us.
I enjoyed being asked. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you for tuning in. Follow the Energy Forum and the Center for Energy Studies for more insights on global energy trends. This episode was produced by Maram Hijazi. Stay productive and never stop learning. Until next time, I'm Ken Medlock.